The desert sun was sinking low when the cowboys spotted her. A lone figure staggered out from the horizon, her dress torn, her hands trembling, and blood soaking her side where a bullet had torn through flesh. Dust clung to her skin as though the earth itself was trying to bury her before her time. The other cowboys glanced her way, shook their heads, and turned back to their own business. To them, she was already as good as dead. But one man, a quiet cowboy with eyes as deep as the canyon, dismounted and walked toward her. He saw something in her eyes, something desperate, something worth saving. She collapsed before she could even speak, her body trembling as her life seeped into the sand. The cowboy knelt beside her, pressing his bandana against the wound. Her breath came in ragged whispers, her lips pale. The others shouted for him to leave her, reminding him that outlaws often lured men into traps. But he refused to walk away. "She's human," he muttered under his breath, "and I ain't about to let her die here like a stray dog." Carefully, he lifted her into his arms, her head resting against his chest, as though trusting him with the last beat of her heart. The ride back to camp was slow, every step of his horse steady and deliberate. He could feel her blood soaking through his shirt, warm and heavy, a reminder of the fragile thread holding her to life. The desert wind bit against his skin, carrying the scent of iron and dust, but he held her tighter. Behind him, the others grumbled about wasting time and risking their own necks. Yet he pressed on, his jaw clenched, his heart whispering that some lives were worth more than the fear of danger. He would not be the man who turned his back. By the time he reached the campfire, her eyes fluttered open for a brief moment. Why help me?" she breathed, her voice no louder than a ghost. He met her gaze and answered simply, "Because you're still breathing." With hands that were more accustomed to ropes and rifles, he cleaned her wound as best he could. The whiskey burned, the cloth tore, and she cried out in pain, but he held her steady, whispering that she wasn't alone. In that moment, the roughness of a cowboy's world softened into a fragile promise. She would not die in the dirt, not while he had strength left. The night stretched long, the stars above like silent witnesses to the battle between life and death. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes whispering a name he didn't recognize, sometimes gripping his hand as though anchoring herself to the earth. He stayed awake the entire night, feeding the fire, watching her chest rise and fall, praying silently for her to hold on. The other cowboys kept their distance, muttering that she'd never see the sunrise. But he refused to let her go without a fight. In her struggle, he saw a reflection of his own scars, the nights he too had been broken, yet saved by the kindness of someone who chose to care. At dawn, her fever rose, and the wound grew angry and red. He tore pieces from his own shirt to bind it tighter, cooling her forehead with water from his canteen. Her pain was unbearable, but each time she whimpered, he whispered back, "Stay with me. Just a little longer." His hands shook from exhaustion, his eyes stung from the smoke, but still he did not let go. To him, this was no longer about duty, it was about dignity. She was not just a stranger bleeding out in the sand. She was someone's daughter, someone who had dreams, someone who still had a chance. By the third day, the others had lost patience. They told him it was time to leave her behind, to move on before trouble found them. But he stood his ground, his voice steady but sharp. "If you can ride away from a dying woman, then you ain't men worth riding with." Silence fell heavy. They didn't argue again, though resentment lingered in their eyes. He no longer cared. His focus was only on her, the woman fate had thrown into his path, the soul clinging to life because he chose to hold her hand instead of walking away. When she finally woke, her eyes clearer than they had been in days, she looked around in confusion. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, and he gently hushed her. "You're safe now," he told her, his voice softer than she expected from a man of the wild. Tears welled in her eyes, not from the pain, but from the weight of kindness she had not known in so long. She had been hunted, abandoned, left for dead, but this cowboy, this stranger, saw worth in her life when others did not. Her gratitude was silent but deep, a bond forged not with words but with survival. In the days that followed, she began to heal, though slowly. He made sure she ate, made sure she rested, and when the fever threatened again, he fought it with every ounce of grit he had. Their conversations grew longer, softer, filled with questions of who she was and where she came from. She revealed fragments of her story, betrayal, greed, and a bullet meant to end her journey. But the details mattered less than the truth shining in her eyes. She was not ready to leave this world yet. And because of him, she didn't have to. For the first time in years, the cowboy felt something stir within him. He had spent his life riding from one horizon to another, never rooted, never tethered. But caring for her brought purpose to his restless soul. He realized that true strength wasn't in the gun at his hip or the horse beneath him, it was in the choice to protect, to nurture, to stand firm when others faltered. She had given him more than gratitude. She had reminded him of the man he wanted to be. One evening, as the fire crackled low, she whispered to him, "If you hadn't stopped," her voice broke, unable to finish the thought. He placed a gentle hand over hers, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "Don't think about what could have been," he said. "Think about what is. You're still here." And in that moment, under the vast blanket of stars, something unspoken passed between them. A trust, a bond, perhaps even the fragile roots of love born out of pain and mercy. Eventually, her strength returned enough for her to sit tall in the saddle. The day she rode again, the other cowboys watched in silence, perhaps even shame. She was living proof that compassion was not weakness but courage. She carried her scar with pride, not as a mark of near death, but as a reminder that even in the harshest land, humanity could still bloom. The cowboy who carried her never sought praise or recognition. He didn't see himself as a hero. He was just a man who made a choice, to stop when others didn't, to care when others turned away. Yet in her eyes, he was more than that. He was the reason she still breathed, the reason she could look to the horizon with hope instead of fear. Together, they continued the journey, not as strangers anymore but as companions bound by fire and blood. The desert still stretched wide and merciless, but no longer did it feel empty. Wherever they rode, they carried with them the proof that kindness could rewrite destiny. The others eventually drifted away, but they stayed side by side. Their bond grew stronger with each mile, built not on convenience but on sacrifice and trust. They were two souls who had nearly been lost, now walking a path neither had expected. And in that journey, they discovered that sometimes the greatest battles are not fought with guns but with hearts brave enough to care. She would forever remember the moment he lifted her out of the dust, the way his arms shielded her from death's grip. And he would forever remember the way her fragile will to live reminded him that even the broken could be healed. Their story became a quiet legend whispered across the plains, a story of survival, compassion, and the cowboy who carried a wounded stranger back to life. Through hardship and fear, they found something greater than survival. They found faith in each other, proof that in a world where cruelty often reigned, a single act of mercy could light a fire that never went out. And as they rode into the endless horizon, their shadows stretched long across the earth, two souls forever bound by the choice to stop, to carry, and to believe in life when all seemed lost. The desert winds never forgot their tale, carrying it through canyons and valleys, reminding all who heard it that sometimes the bravest act is not drawing a gun but extending a hand. She lived because one cowboy chose to see her worth. And he lived differently, too, because saving her had saved something within himself. Their story was no longer just survival, it was proof that love often begins where mercy is given. And so, the lesson lingered long after their tracks faded into the horizon. When the world turns its back, it only takes one person to step forward and change everything. In that truth lay the power to heal, to inspire, and to carry another soul not just to safety, but to life itself.